Yeah. Okay. Do we have any non-English speakers here tonight? I think we're okay. We're studying in the 24th chapter of Matthew, have been there for a while. And we're going to study tonight about verse 24, verse 7, which says, and we studied this last time, which was it 2 weeks ago? I'm losing track of time. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. One gentleman says that in the famine that's prophesied in Acts 8:11 and verse 28 occurred in the 9th year of Claudius, 49 A.D. Some goes back and forth about the date. Acts 11:27 says, in those days there came prophets from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and foretold that through the Spirit that there would be a great famine throughout the land, which happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according as he had determined to send, according as he had determined to send relief to the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Paul. Suetonius, well, here, let's go on. It was severe in Rome. Now, if it's severe in Rome, Rome had reached a point where they couldn't feed themselves from the peninsula of Italy. And so all of their food, grain, came from Egypt and Syria. And they absolutely depended on those ships crossing to bring them grain. So when you see a famine in Rome, you have to realize that means that Egypt and Syria did not produce crops. And so the famine was in Palestine as well. He says it was severe in Rome, and therefore Egypt and Africa, on which the Romans depended so much for supplies, were probably badly affected. There was a famine in Judea about the same time during the reign of Claudius, which is mentioned by Josephus. I wanted to tell you a little bit more about this. This is from Suetonius. He, that is Claudius, always paid scrupulous attention to the care of the city and the supply of grain. If those ships were a week late, people were starving in Rome. And so sometimes the weather would keep them out, or there'd be a storm and many of the ships would sink. And the city of Rome got serious about that time. And it was so serious, the shortage of grain was due to prolonged droughts. He was stopped in the middle of the forum by a mob and pelted with so many insults and pieces of bread that he could hardly escape to the palace by a back door. And after this experience, he resorted to every possible means to bring grain to Rome, even in winter, which was difficult. Travel, the Mediterranean was a difficult travel in the winter. To the merchants, he offered the certainty of profit by assuming the expense of any loss. If your ship sank, he was going to pay for it. You could build another one. And he offered those who built merchant ships large rewards appropriately. This was between 41 and 54 A.D. Anyway, a grain shortage in Rome caused by a drought indicates that the drought occurred in the eastern Mediterranean, in Egypt and in Syria, in those areas. They also later on got a lot of grain from the Black Sea area coming down, but they had the same problem. Will the ships be able to bring it in? Josephus says, and this is in Antiquities of the Jews, now her arrival, this is referring to Queen Helena, the queen mother of Adiabene, a convert to Judaism, was of great benefit to the people of Jerusalem, for while a famine was oppressing them at that time, and many people were dying for lack of necessities to procure themselves food, Queen Helena sent some of her servants to Alexandria with money to buy a large quantity of corn, and others to Cyprus to bring a shipload of figs. Anyway, there's several other references to these 46 to 48 roughly A.D. in a number of different documents. There's a thing called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and it's detailing the same thing, that Claudius about this time took possession of the Orkney Islands in England, and also that there was a famine in Syria, which broke out in Syria. Bede, who was a priest, says it was in year 46, a severe famine occurred in Syria, mentioned in Acts of the Apostles. And Suetonius, I already have referred to that. Tacitus says a night vision he had, that's Claudius, was the cause of the accusation against the man. In this dream he claimed to have seen Claudius crowned with a wreath of wheat, the ears of wheat of which were bent downward. From this vision he predicted poor harvests. Now, now that sounds silly, but the heathen world paid a lot of attention for some reason or another to which bird flew past you on the right or the left, and they would take a chicken and gut it, to read the future from its entrails. So anyway, Tacitus also writes about it some more. So there were famines. Jesus predicted famine. Agabus predicted famine. And as you read through Acts and 1st and 2nd Corinthians, you're reading about how the churches and dealt with that famine situation. Money being brought from Greece and Asia Minor and from Macedonia, as Paul writes about it in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. That's that passage in Acts, the 16th chapter, we quote all the time about contribution. As I've given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay by him in stores God hath prospered, that there be no gathering. They were gathering for this famine that Jesus had predicted before was going to happen before the destruction of Jerusalem. It was going to be a difficult time. But in addition, we're told, at least in the King James, it's not in the revised versions, that there would be pestilence or plague. This is sort of a picture of bubonic plague, but here he says, we've already read about it, as for the plague, although its occurrence could be inferred from the other. In other words, if you're going to have a famine, you're going to have pretty serious disease resulting from that famine. And so there was a plague in 65 A.D. Suetonius refers to in 39 under Nero. And Tacitus says in a single autumn it struck 30,000 people in Rome. Rome was a tremendously crowded city. And so things like this were not usually mentioned by the historians, but there are a few references. Rufus of Ephesus reported outbreaks of severe illness with high fever, pain, agitation, and delirium, and large swellings called buboes in some parts of the Roman Empire. The exact nature of the diseases some of it sort of sounds like malaria, and others were unconfirmed. Could have been various infectious diseases like smallpox. They had a real problem with smallpox, bad periods of smallpox outbreak, typhus or other diseases. Poor sanitation. These cities were not really sanitary. They didn't have good hygiene in Rome, and they were packed tight, and it led to the spread of various intestinal and other diseases, but that was more of a chronic problem. They also used lead pipes, so you can imagine what that resulted in. Infertility, the population decline maybe later on in the subsequent centuries. They had malaria. Roman settlements were often marshy environments. You read about when Paul landed I believe it's the second missionary journey, on the coast of Asia Minor. He wanted to get through that area as quick as he can and uphill because that area on the coast was well known for malarial diseases. I know a lot of the folks that I stayed with and so forth that have been hearing from them. A lot of the folks in Nigeria have a real serious problem with malaria. Most of them have malaria and deal with it as best they can. In cholera, typhoid fever, Hippocrates writes about some of it. They had respiratory problems from their fireplaces and from smoking lamps. They had tuberculosis, which leaves a sort of lesion on bones, and that's been identified in some of the folks that they dug up. And they had smallpox. They're tremendous. This wasn't in the first century period, but the Antonine period, which is second century, they had a tremendous outbreak of smallpox. And Egyptian mummies show evidence of smallpox as early as about 1200 BC. So they were having difficulty with this. Now, he also said there will be earthquakes. And lo and behold, there were earthquakes. These are some of the major earthquakes in the first century. In Judea, from 26 to 36, geological evidence from the Dead Sea sediment layers supports the biblical account of an earthquake during Jesus' crucifixion. There was an earthquake then. Pompeii and Herculaneum. This was in 62 AD. Now, the eruption of Vesuvius was in the late 70s. But here, a severe outbreak of earthquake in that area damaged those cities. They should have taken warning that maybe that volcano that they were sitting virtually on top of might erupt. Seneca described it. Lydia, which is in Asia Minor, an earthquake devastated a dozen cities in the Roman province of Lydia. The historian Pliny the Elder called it the greatest earthquake in human memory. And even today, some of that area constantly has earthquakes. Sicily, archaeological evidence at the, whatever that thing is, necropolis, suggests that a first century earthquake occurred in that region of Italy. Other events, earthquakes were recorded in Crete, Smyrna, Miletus, Chloe, and among other, between the time of Jesus' crucifixion and 70 AD. So you're going to hear about this. They're going to be knowing about it. A little more information. This is from Alfred's commentary on the Greek New Testament. There was a great earthquake in Crete in 46 or 47. One on the day Nero assumed the toga, and one in Phrygia, mentioned by Tacitus in 53 A.D., one in Laodicea in Phrygia in 60 A.D., one in Campania, of course, which is in Italy. And, of course, Josephus writes about the one that probably was a reference to the earthquake at Jesus' crucifixions. Now, Luke, this isn't in Matthew, but Luke 21 in the parallel accounts there in Luke, he talks about it. He says, "Then he said unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom." We've studied about that. "There shall be great earthquakes and famines and pestilences in divers places. And there shall be terrors and great signs from heaven." So, I want to mention some of these things which were recorded. Right now, I keep reading about how we're awfully worried about some comet, big, I don't know if it's is it a comet, or they say it's enormous, that's supposed to pass close to the earth in maybe next decade or something, but it's coming our way, and maybe bigger than the one that killed the dinosaurs, supposedly killed the dinosaurs. And so a sword-shaped comet hovered over the city for a year. And while the people were gathered at, this is from, I think, Josephus, while the people were gathered at the feast of unleavened bread at the 6th hour of night, a sudden light as bright as day shone around the altar and the temple and remained there for almost half an hour. The inner gate of the temple on the side facing east was made of bronze and so heavy that 20 men were needed to close it at dusk. I tried to show you a few weeks ago some of those reconstructions, and that was an enormous gate, enormous door. You remember how it folded? And solid bronze, and 20 men were needed to close it. It was locked with strong iron bolts fixed on the stone posts. Suddenly, the gate flew open, and with great difficulty, the entire assembled guard was able to close it again. So these are stunning things that were happening, unusual things. A few days after that festival, before sunset, chariots and armed squadrons were seen in the sky. I don't know what they saw, but apparently it was a sign in the heavens, and they were amazed. They mingled and formed in such order that they seemed to surround the city in their ecstatic and terrible race. And then this is from a book by Becker called The Destruction of Jerusalem, and I think he got most of this from Josephus. He says, at Pentecost, when the priests on duty entered the temple at night, they said they heard a movement and a noise, and immediately the voice, as it were, of a great multitude saying, "Let us get out of here." Now, that would, you just kind of pass over that, but you let that information pass through the city, and the Christians are being warned. They see all these things that Jesus predicted coming to pass, and they're being warned. So shortly before the outbreak of the Jewish war, 7 years before the siege of Jerusalem, 63 A.D., a peasant named Joshua of Jesus appeared in the city at the Feast of Tabernacles, and in tones of prophetic ecstasy cried out day and night in the street among the people, "A voice of the morning, a voice of the evening, a voice from the four winds, a voice of rain against Jerusalem and the temple, a voice against the bridegroom and the brides." Now, this wasn't in the paper. These people remembered this. A voice against all the people. "Woe, woe to Jerusalem!" The magistrates, terrified by this woe, ordered the prophet of evil to be arrested and flogged. He offered no resistance and continued to cry out his woe. Being brought before the procurator, Albinus, he was flogged until his bones could be seen, but he uttered no word. He uttered no curse on his enemies. He simply exclaimed at each blow in a plaintive tone, "Woe to Jerusalem!" To the governor's questions about who he was and whence he came, he made no reply. Finally, he was let go as a madman, but for 7 years and 5 months, until the outbreak of war, he continued, especially on the 3 great feasts, to proclaim the imminent fall of Jerusalem. During the siege, he sang his funeral dirge for the last time from the wall. Suddenly he added, "Woe, woe is me also," and a stone from the Romans hurled at his head, put an end to his lamentation. Now this, you kind of say, well, this was just crazy stuff. This was going on. Everybody in Jerusalem would have known about this. It would have spread like wildfire, just as bad as if you posted it on Instagram or something like that. It would move quickly. But he also says to them that they would endure great prosecution. This is Matthew 24. He says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you. Do I have that here? Yeah. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And you can skip down just a little bit. Well, we'll cover that in a minute. So they're going to endure tremendous persecution. Well, now, in case you haven't read the book of Acts, it was going on. They were being persecuted pretty heavily. James is killed, Stephen's killed, Peter's in prison, Paul's imprisoned, and there's a plot to kill him. All of that's going on. And on July 18th of the year 64, a fire broke out in the Circus Maximus in Rome. It spread rapidly, burned for 9 days, and destroyed 2/3 of the city. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Dio Cassius concur in accusing Nero of starting and renewing the fire in order to rebuild Rome. There's no proof that he did that, but at least he looked for a scapegoat. There he is playing on his fiddle, his lyre. Nero's scapegoat, I believe this is from Tacitus, was a race of men detested for their evil practices and commonly called Christiani, Christians. The name is derived from Chrestus, who in the reign of Tiberius suffered under Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea. By that event, the sect of which he was the founder received a blow which for a time checked the growth of a dangerous superstition, but it revived soon after, and it spread with renewed vigor not only in Judea but even in the city of Rome, the commonwealth into which everything infamous and abominable flows like a torrent from all parts of the world. Tacitus was a heathen. Nero proceeded with his usual artifice. He found a group of wretched and abandoned people whom he induced to confess their guilt, and on the testimony of such men, several Christians were convinced, not by the clear evidence of having set fire to the city, but rather by their grim hatred of the whole human race. Said Christians hated the human race. They were executed with exquisite cruelty, and to their sufferings Nero added mockery and scorn. Some were covered with the skins of wild beasts and abandoned to their fate by dogs. Others were nailed to crosses. Many were burned alive. Many, covered with inflammable material, were burned to serve as torches during the night. I'm going to show you a picture of something of that. Hebrews alludes to some of these persecutions. Turn over into Hebrews 10. Here we'll notice begin at verse 32. He says, "Call to remembrance the former days in which you were illuminated, ye endured a great fight of afflictions, partly whilst you were made a gazing stock, both by reproaches and afflictions, and partly whilst ye became companions of them that were so used. So for ye had compassion of me in my bonds, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods, knowing in yourselves that you have in heaven a better and enduring substance. Cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. And look in chapter 13 and verse 23, which also refers to it. He says, Know ye that our brother Timothy is set at liberty, with whom if he comes shortly I'll see you. Timothy himself had been imprisoned, probably as a result of this persecution that was going on at this time. Peter warns the Christians in Peter in several places about the fiery trial. You know, let me get over there. The fiery trial that's about to overwhelm them. I believe it's in 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter. He says, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being... Oh, that's not what I want. No, that's not what I want. It's in 1 Peter. He's 1 Peter 4, verse 12. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. But rejoice, inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory shall be revealed, ye may be glad also with exceeding glory. If you be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye, for the Spirit of glory and of God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, on your part he is glorified. So Peter was speaking of the same thing that was happening here, and Jesus had predicted. Nero had apparently decided to turn Christians into a form of entertainment for these people to appease the masses who were accusing him of starting the fire and keeping it going. They were thrown to wild beasts or they were burned alive as human torches. He ordered them crucified so they could emulate their Savior, Jesus Christ. He used Christians to reinforce his authority as a Roman emperor. And so that the persecution created an atmosphere of terror, the fiery trial, forcing Christians into hiding and forcing them to practice their faith discreetly deep within Rome's catacombs. And I came across this drawing, and I've seen several like it. You see all the Roman gentry here, but what they're doing is they're taking Christians and wrapping things around them, probably that were soaked in pitch, and they're setting them afire in his gardens. So yes, they were going to endure persecutions that happened. All this happened. Jesus predicted all this. He said exactly, he predicted all this 30 years roughly before a lot of it came to pass. And then, let's read on just a little bit more here. Well, I think I've got here on the screen. In verse 10, then many will be offended and will betray one another and will hate one another. Now, we just read about that. He got some weak Christians in Rome to give testimony against some of the other Christians. And thereby all of them were brought out. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many, this is verse 12, the love of many will grow cold. He who endures to the end will be saved. we know this happened. 2 Timothy 4, verse 10. Paul says, "Please come to me soon. For Demas, who loved this present world, has left me and gone to Thessalonica. At my first defense, no one stood by me, but all have deserted me. I pray God that this may not be imputed to them." And and we've studied all this, as you go through Timothy and Hebrews and Peter and the other New Testament books, they're warning, they're exhorting, pleading with the Christians to remain faithful because of these terrible events that were coming on them. They're being warned that this is coming, it's going to happen. And in 2 Timothy 1, in verse 15, Paul says, "This you know, that all who are in Asia have forsaken me, among whom are Phygellus and Hermogenes." Paul was alone. They had walked away. They weren't going to endanger themselves by being friendly to Paul. They were going to leave him alone. Tacitus repeats what we've already read. At first, several were arrested and confessed, and then, because of their discovery, a great multitude of others were condemned and executed. This is in Luke. "Ye shall be delivered up, even by parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends, and they shall put some of you to death. And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. Yet shall not a hair of your head perish. By your patience ye shall win your souls." And he's going to warn them, and we'll study that a little later. When they see Jerusalem circled by armies, get out. And I've showed you already historically that there was a general from Syria, the governor of Syria, who in 66, I might be pushing that, maybe 64, brought an army of 20,000 men, I think 1 or 2 legions, from Syria to put the rebellion out. And he circled the city and then got afraid because I don't think he thought it was a little too much for the men that he had. And as he withdrew, they were ambushed, and those legions were virtually wiped out on the way to get out of there. So then the Christians escaped. That's when they went to Pella. They had seen everything that the Lord had told them, and the Lord had given them very precise information about what was going to happen. They were ready for it, and they got out. And so no Christians died in the destruction of Jerusalem. They'd all left. Do what now? Well, most of the historians indicate this period was especially wild and woolly. We've talked about it before, where he said nation will rise up against nation and so forth. We've mentioned the year of 4 emperors in 64 AD when Nero died. And then Vespasian is pulled back to Rome to find, well, he's not pulled back, he actually engineered it. But he goes back to Rome to become emperor and leaves Titus in command. And they saw all those things, and they got out. They were getting out of the area, all of that area, into basically an area where there were Jews, but it was Pella was basically a Gentile city. And so they were relatively safe, in leaving Jerusalem at that time. And no, this, what I've just described to you, did not happen all the time. It wasn't ordinary. This was especially a sort of wild time in Roman history and Mediterranean history, and as Jesus points to it. The final thing he says, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, is in verse 14. We've already talked about many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. We talked about that in a previous lesson. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. He that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom, Luke said they wouldn't lose a hair of their head if they paid attention. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Well, here I'll keep quoting it and not putting it up here. This is a picture of the Roman Empire. Now, you have several statements in the Scripture, and a lot of people argue with them that, they didn't get to the Americans and they didn't preach to the Indians and all that sort of thing. I believe when he says it'll be preached in the whole world, he was talking about the world they knew, and that was primarily the Roman world at this time, and this is roughly the size of Rome at this time, and this map is from 117, and it was about the same size at the time. I think they conquered the Parthians and a little bit after this. This was pretty well the result of the first century in England. But you have several statements. For instance, perhaps the best known is Colossians 1 and verse 23. If you continue grounded and steadfast in the faith, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you have heard, which was preached in every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, have become a minister. He says it was preached to every creature under heaven. In verse 6 of chapter 1 in Colossians, he says, that which is come unto you as it is in all the world, and bringeth forth fruit in you also since the day ye heard and knew the grace of God in truth. Now, I don't really know whether he's saying that, hey, every individual in the Roman world at the time has heard the gospel, or whether he's saying that the gospel is for all. But you have several statements like this. You might notice another one in Romans 16, verse 25. Now to him who is able to establish you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, this is Romans 16:25, according to the revelation of the mystery kept secret since ancient times, but now made manifest and made known by the prophetic scriptures according to the commandment of the eternal God to all nations for the obedience of faith. Now I don't know whether that's saying that it actually got to them or it's been made available to all of them. We probably at some point, I may try to detail at some point for you the traditions about where all the apostles went in this endeavor. Romans 10:18, have they not heard? Yes, indeed, his voice has come into all the earth, and his words to the ends of the world. So it appears that the New Testament Christians believed that prophecy of Jesus had been fulfilled, that there was a witness to all nations, and that they had gone out everywhere preaching the gospel. Now we know. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'll get back to this here in a minute. There. We know some of where these men went, and the rest perhaps is traditional. But anyway, if you're interested, we can talk about that at some point as you see the gospel going out. I know many of them went up into the area of Ukraine. Some went over toward India. Others toward Gaul over in this area. In German territory and French territory. Some into England. And of course, Paul wanting to go over to Spain. And then later on in the century, this area around the Black Sea was taught very well, and there were Roman writers saying that the gospel had been received to such effect over there that the temples, the pagan temples, were being deserted. So, any questions or comments? We're getting down to the more difficult parts of this chapter, this mostly historical, to try to show you that Jesus' predictions came to pass. And it can be validated from the historical record as well as the biblical record. This happened. You know, well, do I have the invitation tonight? It's the first of the month. You all usually afflict me with the first. Nobody else has their hand up, I see, so apparently I have it. But so I'll make a few other comments about that. I appreciate your attention.